Anine, I'm Lisa Meaches. Welcome to our show. Over the years of producing the Sharing Circle, we've explored the history of how Indigenous people have been treated in Canada and how this affects them today. In fact, we've discovered so many unusual circumstances concerning Aboriginal life, we wanted to share many of these little-known facts in one episode we're calling Did You Know? And as you'll see in this documentary, when it comes to the state of Aboriginal affairs in this country, many Canadians are still in the dark.
Do you know when Aboriginal people got the vote in Canada?
No, I don't.
No, I have no clue.
1940.
1940. Well, close. 1960.
That's not close.
It doesn't happen until 1960. My name is Brian Rice, and I teach at University of Winnipeg.
Before 1960, an Aboriginal person could vote, but only if they gave up their status as a registered Indian.
Under Diefenbaker's government, it's finally decided for the first time that Aboriginal people can remain, or Indians can remain as Indians, and at the same time get the federal vote. 1968 in some provinces, I believe.
But did you know Aboriginal people actually won the right to vote 75 years earlier?
In 1885, Aboriginal people in the East were given the franchise, the right to vote. But it was repealed because of the outcry by the general population who said, why should we have to support these people, so on and so forth, and at the same time allow them to have the rights of citizens.
Can you tell me what the Indian Act is?
No, I can't.
No.
Do you know what the Indian Act is?
Yeah, it's a policy that basically sets out rules and regulations that status Indians have to follow.
Oh, the Indian Act was never translated in an official, in any native tongue at all. And here it was representing, you know, who Indian people were, what they're allowed to do, you know, really has all this control on Indian lives.
Is to eliminate, eventually to eliminate any distinctions between Aboriginal people and the dominant society.
This is page 1 and of the 56 pages. They're beaded over. The Indian Act is beaded over with white beads, and red beads were the white pages. It was to render something that had so much power into something like that was like just pretty to look at, you know?
Even today, there's an Indian Act. You know, it's a colonial act that only applies to Indians.
The Indian Act became law in 1876. Over the years, it was amended to increase restrictions on Aboriginal people.
Has it ever been illegal for status Indians to operate mechanized farming equipment?
I would say false.
Say that again.
Has it ever been illegal for status Indians to operate mechanized farm equipment?
Probably, yes. Probably.
It has to be false.
It's actually true.
And that means that Aboriginal people on their farms can only work with hand implements that they make themselves and not even allowed to use metal for nails. And as we get into the 1880s, Aboriginal people are getting very good at farming, and there's a great outcry by the population that this is unfair competition, so therefore Aboriginal people should not be allowed to sell their grain. There was a program loaning cows to Aboriginal people so that they could learn husbandry, you know, and taking care of domestic animals and these types of things. Here you've got cattle, and you can't eat it because you're not allowed to kill the cattle for food. So people were starting to starve. There was an Aboriginal man whose name was Almighty Voice, who killed a cow around 1890 or so. He was taken by the RCMP, or Northwest Mounted Police, I guess at that time, and ended up being told that he was going to be hung for it. He ended up killing the Mountie and was on the run for about 2 years, and then finally they caught him a posse of about 200 with cannons. And we just wanted to feed his people because they were starving.
Has it ever been illegal for status Indians to practice their traditional ceremonies?
False.
False?
That's actually true.
Wow.
False.
That's actually true. Oh, really? Yeah.
Potlatches are a celebration of culture, tradition, and history. Children are involved right from the start.
Even though they may not fully understand the specifics about potlatch, they're here to gain the spirit, and in that spirit they gain the strength of identifying who they are.
The European Christians actually believed that the traditional ceremonies and sweat lodge and whatnot were the work of the devil. My name is Mark Francis Rummel. I teach at the University of Winnipeg Religious Studies Department. You know, the traditional ceremonies, Sundance, Sweat Lodge, Vision Quest, Shake Tent, the feasting, the giveaway, the potlatches, all the traditional ceremonies were actually outlawed in Canada. It was against the law. It was against the law to be singing, to be drumming, to be dancing, to have a giveaway. It's totally bizarre.
The laws pertaining to the prohibition against the potlatch actually starts about 1884.
In the potlatch, all sorts of goods are given away, where an individual would almost sort of give away their whole wealth. It's so central to the existence of the whole culture, essentially.
By about 1894 or so, then you have prohibitions against traditional dancing and sun dancing and all these types of things. And the idea, of course, is that as long as Aboriginal people are tied to these things, they will never be able to integrate. They'll never be part of the civilized process.
Like, people were charged for this. That's totally bizarre. How can you charge somebody for singing, for dancing? It's really weird, but it's all part of the colonial enterprise. You see, you have to, if you're trying to take over, the land and the resources, you have to, eradicate the traditional ways.
It was the Indian agent living on each reserve who enforced the rules. Aboriginal people even needed a pass signed by the agent before they could leave their community.
Do you know what an Indian agent is?
I have no clue what that is.
He was the one that made sure that the Indian Act was enforced.
So they are becoming the law unto themselves, little almost dictatorships.
Has it ever been illegal for status Indians to possess alcohol?
False.
Carrying, selling, any offenses concerning liquor, you weren't supposed to be around liquor at all. But yeah, you could get 6 months imprisonment, for liquor offenses, and it could be harsh, hard labor.
Has it ever been illegal for registered status Indian to be in a pool hall in Canada?
False.
That's actually true.
It's true.
Yeah.
Even being in a pool hall where there's no liquor, that could be a 6-month offense.
First Nations veterans are proud of their wartime contributions. But when they returned to Canada, they were faced with mixed emotions.
Even vets, coming back from the war, can't go out to the Legion halls.
First Nations veterans were supposed to receive the same benefits as any other servicemen or women. The problems occurred when First Nations veterans were told to return to their reserves and see their Indian agents about their benefits. Veterans Affairs spread news about the charter through posters in Legion halls. But the Liquor Prohibitions Act prevented First Nations veterans from entering Legions. So they had no way to find out what their rights were.
Did Aboriginal veterans get the same benefits as other veterans after World War II?
No, actually, I don't think so, because my relative was Sergeant Tommy Prince, and he wasn't recognized when he got back from the war and that, and yeah, it was not good. He just went on the streets and he didn't get the same treatment.
Next on the Sharing Circle, a few other things you might not know.
Even among bands and band counselors and chiefs, if they want to set up a business, they have to apply and get permission from the federal government.
At most traditional ceremonies, one can see the key ingredient of Aboriginal society: equality between men and women.
When you live a subsistence lifestyle, you need cooperation, equal cooperation between men and women. What some people don't realize is that in some societies, women played some pretty prominent roles in terms of even military roles and such in defending the communities. Women had a great say in terms of who would be the representatives of the people.
In the old days, in the traditional way, is that the women were the ones that were basically the bosses, the decision makers, and the leaders. Male Europeans did not want to deal with the women. The women appointed the men that would deal with the Europeans. So they still were, basically behind the scenes controlling things, I guess, if you want to put it that way.
And the women, we are the life givers, we are the water carriers. We're the backbone of the family. And the men are the providers, the protectors, and the firekeepers. Because you see out there, there's that balance, that male and that female.
I've discovered in looking at the early treaties, the first agreements, women are signatories to any agreements concerning land in about the 17th century, and by about the 18th century they begin to be omitted from the process, so you don't see their names any longer.
From the teachings that people today, the elders and traditional teachers talk about, is the role of women is that they're the ones that are the bringers of life. Without them, we don't have life.
And without traditional Aboriginal society, American democracy may not have developed as it did.
Well, Aboriginal societies played a great role in terms of influencing European societies and changing their governing structures. The Iroquois Confederacy, for instance, were very influential and were called in 1753 to the Albany Conference so that Benjamin Franklin could understand the process of governance that the Six Nations had. In 1988, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution basically stating that the Iroquois Confederacy was very influential in them creating a democratic charter and a constitution.
While Aboriginal governments helped shape American democracy, in Canada, those traditional governing structures were outlawed.
There was also a change that would start to occur about 1869 in terms of absolving the traditional forms of government in favor of the electoral type of band council system that we know today exists. And by 1924, the RCMP goes into Six Nations and then deposes the last traditional governance.
Can you name one thing that could help the Aboriginal people right now?
Reduced corruption amongst reserve leaders and a better internal government.
It's only really with the Revised Indian Act in 1951 and with the franchise being given to Indians in 1960 that businesses really start to, Aboriginal people start getting into businesses and such.
Ainsley is a perfect example of the fastest growing trend in Aboriginal business in Canada. She's young, she's Métis, and female.
We have found that there are literally hundreds of Aboriginal community members that want to start their own business.
While it's challenging for Aboriginal entrepreneurs in cities, starting a business on a reserve can prove even more difficult.
If they want to set up a business, they have to apply and get permission from the federal government. And it takes sometimes 60 days, it could take 6 months, it could take even more than a year or so even to get an answer. If it's an affirmative, then you've got a whole nother wait of a year or two, and then you've got to try and get the money.
Do you think Aboriginal people have the same opportunities as other Canadians?
No. Because you ask me those questions, and it's illegal for them to do some, just everyday ordinary things, and that just seems way out of proportion.
Next on the Sharing Circle, a few more things you might want to know.
There's already a presumption being made, even at an early stage, that Aboriginal people will never be true owners of their lands.
Today, education for Aboriginal students is vastly different from the infamous Indian residential schools of the past.
The government decided that they would take children away from their families and off the reserves and bring them into the school to teach them the Canadian culture.
Hippie Residential School was set up essentially to assimilate the Aboriginal people into white society, which miserably failed.
Industrial residential school times, the whole point is to really create almost like domestic servants out of Aboriginal people.
Can you tell me what an Indian residential school is?
Are those the schools from way back in the day where they would try to convert the native people to Christianity and treated them very poorly, I think?
I always talk to my students about this, say, did you know this is what happened in the instruction of Cree children? And it was basically, they're taught all your traditional culture is wrong, it's the work of the devil. Dancing is evil, singing is evil, all these things is evil.
Residential schools stripped me from my rights. Residential schools stripped me from my language.
Father Fafard, he asked the question, who is breaking the first commandment? And then the answer is, first, he who worships devils, animals, the sun, stars, false idols. Second, he who does drumming, shaking tent, evil singing, evil feasting, evil smoking, and dream quests, because these are the devil's creation. That's just bizarre.
You do not know how many people died and suffered in residential school.
Where you've had societies that were functioning quite well, they didn't need any kind of change. They had an excellent relationship with the Creator and the natural powers of the universe, beautiful spiritual traditions, beautiful cultural values, and then to have that taken away,
Now they're trying to pay us to keep our mouths shut. What, 30 grand? 30 grand for how many years of suffering since we were 4 years old? That isn't worth it, man.
At the end of the day, as a survivor of the residential school, the CEP is not going to help in terms of healing. It'll recognize our common experience.
If it wasn't for residential school, man, I wouldn't be here right now, to tell you the truth. I'd probably still be in the res speaking my language, man. Straight up.
From the time the first treaties were signed, Aboriginal people fought hard to have the promises in these agreements honored. But it's been an uphill battle that has lasted for centuries. And today in Canada, treaty rights and land claims are still far from being fully acknowledged and respected.
It's an infringement on the integrity of the treaties when they were signed themselves, that Aboriginal people would be able to retain not only their way of life, but also in some cases be able to utilize their lands to prosper. Most of the resources of Canada come from the lands that are still pristine where Aboriginal people still live.
There's so much money at stake. There's so much money for multinational corporations. How many billions and billions of dollars are being, taken from the natural resources essentially. So if you own that, you don't want to sort of give any of that up.
It wasn't long before the newcomers were dividing our lands amongst themselves. In 1763, King George III set forth a royal proclamation defining the process for obtaining access and title to First Nations lands.
So they're not really protecting Aboriginal interests, they're protecting their own interests. Because their fear is, what if Aboriginal people are true owners of the land? Then they would have the right to negotiate with anybody over those resources and such.
Land claim is the native people have actually claimed the fact that they were here first, and that certain pieces of land do belong to them. It's their right to have it.
Aboriginal people have paid the highest price for the minimum of subsistence, because basically what Aboriginal people are living on is subsistence allowance. That's it, just enough to get by. Okay, so I mean, what's the highest price? Is look at the amounts of land that were signed in treaty. Look at the wealth that has been generated for Canadians.
This is the homeland for Aboriginal people, First Nations people. There is no other homeland. This is where they have lived for time immemorial. So now they're put on reserves on leftover land, right, in their own homeland. I'm surprised that there hasn't been more of a revolt of some kind.
Nation states have to start to recognize, according to the international forms and such, Aboriginal rights to the lands that they live on and have subsisted on for thousands of years. However, Canada has been one of the few countries that have not signed on to the International Declaration of Indigenous Rights.
These people are in desperate need of a history lesson. They need to know what the history is, and it's recent history. And I think that people can't seem to, I don't know why, but they just can't seem to get their head around the fact that this is their homeland. This is the Aboriginal, the First Nations people's homeland. Anishinaabe people have lived here since time immemorial.
Can you think of one thing that could happen right now that would help Aboriginal people in Canada?
People just change the way they think, just try to eliminate racism from their vocabulary and try to eliminate stereotypes about Aboriginal people. Maybe get out and meet some Aboriginal people, attend different Aboriginal ceremonies and be a part of the culture. So I think if there's more sharing of cultures and ideas, that'd be really helpful as well.